Hello and welcome to the program Discuss on Global Television. I am Samuel Odi. Many thanks for joining on today's edition of the program. Today we look at a very critical sector in Nigeria that is affecting everyday life of every citizen, every class, every category of person in this country which has to deal with the power sector. I will be looking at the power sector and the privatization. We'll trickle it down to the impact it's having on the life of an everyday Nigeria. For over a decade after Nigeria privatized its electricity sector, opinions remain sharply divided, while proponents argue that privatization has attracted investment, expanded generation capacity, and reduced government burden. Critics point to persistent blackouts, raising electricity tariffs, poor metering, and continued struggle of businesses and households to access reliable power. Going back to memory, in 2023, the federal government transferred the ownership of power distribution and generation companies to private investors with expectation that efficiency, competition, and investment would transform the sector. Today, Nigerians asks, has privatization delivered on it, falling short of expectations? Today's edition of Discuss, we examine the impact of the privatization of power sector and electricity generation, distribution, tariffs, investment, economic growth, and daily lives of Nigeria, and the state of the nation so far. We'll take a background look at Nigeria's power sector dating back to the early 20s, where Nigerian power sector reform began with the onboarding of former power holding company of Nigeria, PHC, and we all know that it used to be NEPA before, power holding company, before we're having different disco companies in the country, and generation company into all as well. So looking at it from those angles now, into separate generation, transmissions, and distribution companies, the object was clear: improve electricity supply, attract private investment, enhance efficiency, reduce government spending, create a competitive electricity market in Nigeria. But so far, the reform led to the emergence of several generation companies known as Discourse and distribution companies, also known as Discourse. More than decades later, the sector continues to face major challenges, including inadequate power generation, weak transmission, infrastructure, high operational costs, energy theft, and vandalism. Poor revenue collection, a huge debt across value chain. Despite these challenges, stakeholders argue that significant progress has also been recorded. Well, Nigerians are now agreeing with the fact, based on the fact that a whole lot of time, areas, some communities, even in the Federal Capital Territory, are complaining about blackouts. We saw recently that the power sector alone owes a debt ranging to 3.9, despite all of the investment, despite all of the monies being borrowed to improve and get more power generation. The country is still suffering from epileptic power supply. Now, we're tilting to climate change happening, a whole lot happening in the globe, and a whole lot of diversification is going on at this point in different sectors. Even in the power sectors, people are tilted to solar, renewable energy, and all of that. But still, Nigerians are still complaining and asking about the fact that why is it hard to generate power? But we find this how it's affecting, excuse me, how all of this is affecting businesses, how it's affecting livelihoods, and most of me, particularly, faring with the current cost of tariffs. We saw a series of bans being introduced by the federal government to have power in this same band. They have complained about despite and paying the fee and the tariffs for those in gets to see the required amount of time to be able to enjoy power. But arguments that privatization has been a success. Some supporters have argued that privatization points to several achievements: increased generation capacity. Before privatization, Nigeria generated far less electricity than current levels. Private investors have expanded generation facilities and introduced new investments in some power plants. Increased investment, the sector has attracted billions of naira in investment from both local and international investors. This investment has supported infrastructural upgrades, equipment procurement, and network expansion. Improved metering and introduction of various metering programs has reduced estimated billing in some areas and improved customer accountability. Regulatory improvement. The establishment of stronger regulatory framework has created greater transparency and accountability in the industry. Some persons have argued differently about this. Reduced government monopoly and privatization ended the era of complete government control, opening the sector to private sector's participation and innovations. So people have argued that yes, this is a success. Yes, government's intervention of somehow fairly reduced and opened more room for lots of investors. But are these investors living up to their promise? The answer from a lot of business owners and household individuals has not been in the affirmative. But another argument, on the other hand, some have argued differently that privatization has totally failed. Critics insist that the privatization has not yielded what it promised. The reform has not translated into meaningful benefit for consumers. Persistent power outage, many Nigerians still experience daily blackouts despite years of privatization. Businesses continue to rely heavily on generator for survival. Rising electricity tariffs, consumers have witnessed repeated tariff increase without corresponding improvement in service delivery. Many households struggles to pay rising electricity bill. Inadequate infrastructure transmission remains largely government-owned and continues to face a serious capacity constraints. Distribution networks also suffer from aging infrastructure, poor customer service. Consumers frequently complain about faulting bill, delayed responses to complaints, slow repairs, inadequate communication for service providers, financial challenges. Many Discourse continue to battle liquidity problems, debt accumulation, and low revenue collection. This has limited their ability to invest in infrastructure and also invest in improving the current standard of the kind of power supply Nigerians enjoy. And then those have been the success and the failed stories from two different group of individuals that have argued that yes, some have said success has happened in some field and some are arguing that businesses and households crumble. Then the broader view now, how is this? What implication does it have on the economy, and how has the economy been performing? Because everything works hand in hand, literally. But the performance of the power sector directly affects Nigerians' economy. Reliable electricity supply can help boost industrial production, create jobs, attract investments, lower production costs, improve competitiveness. On the other hand, unreliable electricity increases business costs, discourages investment, and slows down the economic growth. Before we go further, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is having a vision of having a 1 trillion naira economy, GDP. So, looking at this now, if insecurity is untackled, if there is no steady power supply, how will all of this be feasible? Nigerians are calling for, okay, settle insecurity and provide us power, we are good. That is what a whole lot of Nigerians have been calling for. But we will be going down and looking at the nitty-gritties, the angles where this is actually affecting the economy and how businesses are suffering, and why the power sector needs to do more and do better in terms of providing and generating reasonable amount of power for Nigerians to consume. The DG of the Energy Commission, Dr. Abdullahi Mustafa, on his end, has actually been doing a whole lot of infrastructural development in Nigerian schools, because he is someone that is very close to the grassroots and is particular about lighting up schools. So we have seen during his time, under his leadership as the Director General of the Energy Commission, we have seen significant improvement in Nigerian schools, as he's very particular about improving the standards of learning and having, providing individual schools renewable and clean energy for them to be able to use and continue their studies. But now, coming back, manufacturers have argued that they often spend significant portion of their operating expenses on alternative power source. For small businesses, energy costs can determine survival or closure. So this is just one of the major concerns that business owners are advocating about, and we'll get to hope that all of these will be taken care of. On other aspects of social impact and security, electricity has also affected social development, reliability improves, healthcare delivery, education, outcome, security system, digital innovations, quality of life. Community without stable electricity often face limitation in accessing modern opportunities and essential services. Now we'll have to look for the way forward away from all of these and see how this would actually help improve the livelihoods of Nigerians. This is actually one of the major concerns, one of the major reforms that Nigerians are calling the president to look into, away from just, tackling the cost of insecurity and how badly it's affecting the economy, how badly it's affecting the way of life of people. This is another sector that Nigerians are actually asking for to be improved, so as they would be able to run their businesses and also not have concerns about worrying of and improving competitiveness in the market. So we'll be going on a quick break, and then afterwards I'll introduce my guests who would help us understand all of this and how Nigerians can be able to leverage on the climate change and diversify, and what the government can also do to ease the burdens on Nigerians so as they can be able to have affordable power supply. I'll be introducing my guests who will be joining me virtually immediately after this break. Stay with us. All right, many thanks for staying with us. If you're just joining, this is the Discuss, and we're about to have a very in-depth conversation around what is affecting the lives of an everyday Nigerian, which obviously has power. Beyond transportation and moving around, power is something very critical to the development of Nigerian's economy and how SMEs get to perform. Most of the times, a lot of SMEs have complained about the cost of the rising cost of tariffs and how it has been affecting businesses negatively. So to join me have this conversation is Sani Musa. Sani Musa is an energy economist and he is joining me virtually all the way from Dundee. Good afternoon, Musa. Thank you so much for joining on today's edition of Discourse.
Good afternoon, Mr. Samuel. I'm really excited to join you here. I am speaking from Edinburgh, the capital city of Scotland.
Now it's been over a decade since these reforms and privatization happened in Nigeria. So walk us through how you feel the reform, if it has been successful or there are more rooms for improvement.
Okay, obviously, as you rightly mentioned, it's been over a decade since the privatization happened. And looking back at history, we can trace it from 1972, between 1972 and 1998. That was when the federal government of Nigeria decided to make reforms and ensure that privatization is brought in place just so that the power sector can be deregularized and as well be liberalized from the challenges that were observed at that time. So the question of whether it has yielded many results or otherwise is dependent on the variables that we try to look at. So if we're looking from the aspect of constant power supply, the return of constant power supply in households, then we can say that the privatization has done little to that effect. And that is why we're here. I so much believe that we can get to discuss further into the subject.
All right. Looking at those angles now, from what you just mentioned, Musa, privatization has so far, not reached the mark of the expectations of a lot of Nigerians, and mostly SMEs are complaining about, the recent tariff hikes and all of that is going on. So how can all of this be managed? You are someone who is into renewable energy. Walk us through how you feel business owners shouldn't just solely depend on the government for power, but also diversify and see how they can generate powers for themselves.
Brilliant. So, Samuel, I think let me just draw us a little bit back just to understand the reasons or the motivations why the whole privatization was brought into play. As I mentioned, around the early 1998 to 2000s, the government has been facing serious problem with funding and financing the power sector. And due to this problem, they come to terms that it must be privatized. So privatization, as is intended, should be able to provide solutions to the problems at that time. But sadly, from what a lot of researchers have been able to identify, the privatization didn't follow the normal procedure that it should. That is why we are having the same problems that we are having. For instance, you're talking about the challenges of absence of transparency and fair play in bidding process. I can remember there was once the Director General of the Bureau for Public Enterprise, Mr. Bonanle. I can't actually remember his surname, but then he mentioned that under his reign, there were over 207 pre-qualified biddings that came to submit their bidding in either generation or distribution. And just for people that are not very technical, the power sector is divided into three main categories. We have the generation and we have the transmission and then the distribution. So in Nigeria, we have two arms privatized, and then the government still control the transmission, which to me, I think the transmission is the most hardest aspect among these three pillars, and even the most cost sensitive, and not just cost sensitive, but capital intensive. And the government decided to hold this. And that is why we keep seeing the grid collapse we keep seeing inefficiencies around that, in such a way that when the generators generate electricity, the transmission or the off-takers, which in this instance is the federal government, are not able to take away from that. And you bring it down to household. You see, household are the end consumers, or rather the end beneficiaries of whatever happens. If it is good, they are beneficiaries. When it is otherwise, they suffer the consequences. And what we have today is a multi-dimensional challenges. You can actually even talk about one aspect of just maybe the pricing or tariffs. You also have to consider about whether the supply is sustainable, is reliable or not. So I think it's a multi-dimensional problems that the household continue to face in Nigeria.
Those are very interesting points you highlighted. You mentioned about the three major categories, which is very feasible around, power, which is generating and also transmitting. So you mentioned that I think the path of transmission, I think that's where the problem has been. But do you think that's where the problem has been? Do you think Nigeria gets to generate enough power that can, service the entire country? Let's start from there. Do you think Nigeria has been able to generate that?
The answer is a fundamental no. Nigeria has not been able to generate enough power to cater for its over 200 million population. And I think that is a huge problem. And sometimes you have to, in assessing this, you have to look deeper into the dynamics. I told you that you have the generation aspect of it, and then you have the transmission, and then the end one is the distribution, which transmit or which distributes to the last consumer. So the generators can only be able to generate what can be transmitted. So it's just like a connected chain. It's a connected value chain that every individual pillar depends on the other. Generators cannot generate what the transmission lines cannot take. And as well, distributors can only take what is given to them by the transmission lines. So when one is broken, you have a serious problem from all of that. So in terms of generation, the current generation capacity is about 5,000 megawatt or so of electricity, which if you consider to the amount of population that we have in the country, it is actually very, very low. And when you tend to compare it with other countries, even poorer countries like Bangladesh as of today, Bangladesh is generating over 3 times what we are generating in Nigeria. So you can just imagine that deficit that we have. So the answer is a fundamental no. And the reason could be attributed to the ineffective transmission that we have. And also, you can also talk about the inefficiencies that are within the distribution, because that is when you talk about billing, that is when you talk about even consumers, are they paying commensurate to what they are consuming or whatever relevant to that. So we are not producing as supposed.
All right. Those angles now, like you mentioned, right, are very interesting. So now, what can be done? You mentioned a few countries like Bangladesh who are generating more. So how can we generate more power? How do you think the government or the private sectors that are in line with power generation, how do you think they can be able to improve the standards of generation of power that would be able to service the entire country that is housing over 200 million people?
So in this, I think it's a responsibility for all the parties. I mean, the party for generation, those that are in the transmission, which in this context is the federal government, and also the distributors. As I told you, it is a value chain that depends on each aspect of it. So it's just an interconnected value chain. One can perform irrespective with the performance of the other. So we can only be able to get better outcome, better generation when the transmission is carrying enough. And also we can only get distribution when the transmission is getting is meeting the demand. And I would start to tell you that from the generation aspect, I believe we do not have a generation problem in Nigeria. we may have, but the fundamental problems lies in the transmission, which is the um, middle player. That is when you talk about the bulk electricity trading company that offtake this generated electricity. So that is where you get to see the transmission problems. That is when you get to see the grid failures. That is when you have to see a lot of inefficiencies, which are attributable to the fact that we have a very old infrastructure, which was built since the 1970s. So we need modernization in that aspect to be able to see a better delivery. And then when you now bring it down to the distributions, you have the Discourse complaining about revenue realization. I was just reading recently that in March, there was about 80%, just to be very specific, 79 point, I think 0.54% um, of revenue coming in from consumers. Well, that is an improvement from the previous statistics. It is still not very, very excellent, simply because you are losing about 20%. And this is attributable to the fact that Nigeria is not properly metered. According to the NAC, only about 50% of the electricity consumers are properly metered. And when you have a nation or a customer base that is significantly not metered and significantly reliant on arbitrary billings, you will be able to have a lot of deficit and you can't control what comes into your pocket. So connecting all these three dots, that is when you are able to, see improvements and see development in the overall electricity delivery from the generators to the transmission and also to the distribution. And in doing this, Samuel, I would like to always highlight the fact that I still wonder why Nigeria decided to privatize generation and distribution while keeping transmission, which I mentioned to you is the most weakest and as well most capital intensive aspect of the electricity delivery in Nigeria. I still wonder why they did that, but I can understand that they did that because of the fear of natural monopoly, because transmission is a natural monopoly. And in this instance, natural monopoly means something that comes as a one player, is naturally a monopoly. So it comes just, it has to be operated by a single entity, and the government deem it fairer to control it. I know about other factors as well, which are very good factors that the government deems fit to hold transmission to it. But countries like the United Kingdom, where I am in, have privatized everything. They privatize both the generation, the transmission, and of course the distribution. And that is why you tend to see an effective delivery from every part of the sector. So in Nigeria's case as well, we can do that. It is still a monopoly. Some people would argue, how do you then do it? There are businesses. It should still be a monopoly, but not a government monopoly. It should be a monopoly given to businesses. The business can come in to do it. Like in the UK, we have the National Grid, which is a monopoly, but as well a private entity controlling it. So until we are able to address this, until we are able to have that, then we would not see competitiveness in the market. And when you don't have competitiveness, even consumers are not assured of reliability in the electricity that is delivered to their homes.
Nigerian government should say to monopolize the transmission of this of the power sector, just like what the United Nations are doing. Do you think that Nigerians would have improved electricity supply, and the issue of our national grid collapsing would be, I would say, something of the past? Because currently Nigeria has installed electricity generation capacity of over 14,000 megawatts, but however, due to gas shortage and some grid limitations, and again, like you mentioned, aging infrastructure, the only available power to be dispatched to Nigeria, the entire nation, is within 4,000 to 5,800 megawatts. So if this does happen, do you think that is the monopolization of the transmission of the power sector? Do you think we would enjoy reasonable power supply?
Yeah. Yes, Samuel. And this is also going to be a subjective answer because there is no pretty straightforward answer because these are things that you cannot guarantee outrightly. For instance, the privatization has been there for many years, and then we still have face challenges with every aspect. So, but what I believe and what I am very optimistic about is that um, governments taking giving out that transmission would certainly improve competitiveness and will certainly introduce business. And when you have businesses taking over businesses, or when you have government relieving very sensitive areas like the transmission, I so much believe that competitiveness would come in, and that is when everybody would be paying for quality. So that means they will just treat it as business, not as government. And I know, of course, the fear is that the consumers might be exposed to higher tariffs. But of course, government can always come in to introduce price caps, can always come and introduce regulations, strict ones, through the National Electricity Regulatory Commission and all of that. So I believe it will definitely translate into a very, it will take us in a better position because it has taken the United Kingdom into better position. And also it has taken the United States into a better position. So if these countries can do it, I believe if we do it the right way, we're going to do it. But we should always not fail to get it right because the failures we're seeing from our privatization so far, from the power sector privatization, is something that I like to term or make reference with the elite theory. I don't know whether you're aware of the elite theory, but in simple terms, elite theory argues that um, in every society, there are two groups of people. We have the elites, those that rule the majority, who are the elites, and then those that are ruled by the majority. Those ones they are not the elites. So if we tend to take that concept into electricity privatization in Nigeria, we would see it clearly. Because when they were privatizing, there were a lot of favoring of even people that were not qualified, even businesses that were not qualified to be there. So taking elitism the elite theory into consideration, it can yield a lot of challenges like we're facing today. But if we can monopolize that to the fitting businesses, I believe we are going to see a massive improvement in how transmission happens, and we are going to see a lot of reductions in grid failures. Grid failures, we have talked this a lot, and it has been analyzed by many analysts that government interventions have not been sufficient. We need to improve our infrastructure, and only businesses can do it in a better way, especially if the businesses are financially capable.
We've always seen over time that SMEs have been the major drivers of every country's economy. We could date back to Singapore, we could look at China, we could look at even the UK and America. SMEs are the major drivers of country's economy. So trickling it down to Nigeria and Africa at large, looking at how the globe is evolving with renewable energy and diversifying into electric vehicles and all of that, how integral is it going to be, and how swift is it going to be for the Energy Commission of Nigeria and the TCN, that's the Ministry of Power? How swift is it going to be for them to start adopting this modern way of clean energy generation for, mostly importantly, businesses? Then before we could trickle it down to the home front, because those at home are consumers, but the business individuals will help boost the economy. So how integral is it going to be that all hands are on deck for the massive wave that we're seeing in the power sector globally?
Obviously, it's not going to be very easy. We have to be realistic. On paper, it could be easy, but when you talk about implementation, it is very difficult, especially in a regulatory environment or in an environment that is politically unstable, that is a risk perceived high risks in all the environment. So, but what I believe is that if the goodwill is there, then there is no any difficulty in making it. And Nigeria has already started. There are a lot of admirable efforts by the government and even by the private sector institutions like the banks and all of other development financiers. So it is just about us trying to, ramp up and, push further. If the government can push further deliberately and willingly, given a very realistic timeline, that by so amount of time we want to attain this particular stage, then I don't see any problem why we can do that swiftly. For now, I believe that there are a lot of admirable initiatives by the Regulatory Commission, and I know that clean energy investments are, to an extent, an important priority for the government, because we are seeing more great developments, more projects are coming in, and also even if you look at the DARE project and other project that the Rural Education Agency are doing. So you can tell that we're getting somewhere. And even our Electricity Reform Act, which is also a key player in this and a key determinant in making all these policies better, which has granted states, or let me say sub-regions, that independence to generate power and control what happens in their own regions or states. I believe that we are getting there, and we only need to keep doing that.
That trajectory continues. Oh, let's talk about new renewable energy and how effective it's going to be for business owners and obviously household. You are someone who is versed in energy. So, what are those fastest, or would I say, easier to purchase powers or energy transition away from the normal activities that we are aware of? How integral is it going to be that Nigeria sanitization happened within the power sector, so as individuals and businesses would know the right batteries, I would say, if they want to buy, and right solar panels that they need to buy. They want to diversify and tilt towards green energy.
Yeah, solar has been the cheapest, and not just the cheapest, but the easily accessible renewable energy source for many. There are a lot of development technologically about the solar panels, about the solar technologies, and in the market you find more solar equipment faster than you can find any other renewable energy source. So solar is the go-to for many small and medium enterprises. And when you talk about the impact of that on their businesses, it is not anything to argue about, that it is going to make their businesses easier. We have seen a number of businesses, maintaining reliable power supply, or at least maintaining power supply at the times that they want their business to be running. I was just going through a statistics by the World Bank that Nigeria loses over $200 billion annually on what? On just diesel generators. So, this is a very huge amount that businesses, not just the SMEs, but even major industries, major businesses lose annually on just powering their factories, powering their business institutions. So if you take that amount and look at the savings, you are going to find an impressive amount that they save from that. And not just that, they are going to have it longer. So even when the grid falls, they do not have anything to worry. And that will keep their businesses moving faster. And when their businesses are moving faster, their customers always patronize them. And in doing that, it is a simple economics that when customers patronize, even the government gets more VATs, So it's a win-win for everyone. And in the long term, businesses would be cheaper because renewable electricity in the long run is the cheaper means of electricity. So in the long run, when businesses begin to adapt fully into renewables, everyone would tend to have a better pricing and affordability would be a very amazing thing to happen.
Distribution and power sector, because I think don't you think the lack of competition is what is actually making individuals or Nigerians have lesser power provisions for the use for the nation?
I don't understand competition. In what regard are you talking about?
Competition within more competition between in the power sector. Like, my point is, a lot of
Mm.
persons are really not diversifying into the aspect of providing or generating power. So if we have more competitions in that sector, do you think that there are ways that it would help improve the capacity or improve the distribution of power in the country? That's my question.
Absolutely, Samuel. As I mentioned to you, part of the cardinal objectives of the electricity or power sector privatization is liberalization and also privatization, and as well, you know, um, engendering a sustainable power supply. So when you have a competition, and remember, I told you the government wanted to get rid of the monopoly. That is why they introduced even the power holding company, because then it used to be a NEPA monopoly. And now you get to see more gen costs, like the Niger Delta Power Holding companies and a lot of other, even hydro-powered plants. So the competition in the generation segments of the electricity sector has brought to an impressive generation rate. And that is why I was telling you, even the transmission would get better when fully privatized or in some way privatized and relieved off of government responsibilities. So competition is very important for any economy. It's better for the consumer because consumer tends to have more choices, and it's put pressure on the businesses to give value or to give proper value. Remember, I told you the argument is, or the challenge has always been about consumers um, paying what they did not receive. And that is why the electoral reform, the recent one, intended to tackle the issues of a consumer should be able to pay commensurately to what he has consumed. So competition is really important in economics, and even in power sector, it is very, very important. In the UK, there is a lot of competition among the discourse. There are a lot of distribution companies, and the consumer can decide to, choose which supplier he wants electricity from. And in Nigeria, we have that, but to an extent, it is limited. And one simple thing that we can look into is, for instance, the distribution companies in Nigeria are very large, or I mean, they cover too large, except Eco Distribution and Ikeja Electric. I think all other distribution lines cover a massive area that needs to be reduced for efficiency. Just for instance, you would see just electricity distribution company covering many states. You see Abuja Electricity Company covering many. You see the same in Kano and Kaduna. So if those companies can be cut or can be reduced to cover just areas that they can, give better value to, and other companies created as competitors, I think that would add so much value to not just the consumer, but to the economy itself. Because when you have competitors, everything tends to go in a more qualitative way, and rather in a more profitable way for both parties.
Earlier, you highlighted some concerns around revenue generation and, vandalism, and how some of these discourse companies don't get to generate enough of their revenue, despite the fact that they get to supply and distribute power. And you also highlighted statistics from the World Bank on how much Nigeria gets to lose annually, despite there was a significant bullish run in that light, but still, it's something that can be improved. So how can disco companies generate more revenue collection technically from those that consume from them.
So now you consider a lot of things as well, because power sector is just very vast, and you are talking about different players. Even the consumers are a player. So distribution companies would earn more when there is a favorable environment created by the government. And in this regard, one must appreciate the effort of the government in attempting to meter all electricity consumers within certain amount of years. I think to 5 years. I think that is a target. I'm not very precise about that, but I know that the project has started rolling out. That would help not just the GenCos, but even not just the Discourse, but also the consumers. But metering does not guarantee payments, because metering is more of a measurement. It's just more of a transparency tool that tells the consumer what he consumes, and also tells the disco what has been consumed, in just a way of giving a fairer play for everyone to know. So Discourse would end better when we have other 50% of the Nigeria's electricity consumers metered and properly billed. And another huge factor is that consumers would always want a better service first before they make better payments. So if you have a situation where Discos are only providing few hours of electricity, then consumers will be discouraged to pay properly. So that is why I told you, in a better power sector situation, there would be a proper billing where consumers pay commensurately to what they are being given. So I believe that Discourse have to improve on what they give out. And in improving, they have to hold the transmission accountable, and the generators also accountable, because I told you it's an unbreakable chain. Whichever part of it you touch, it affects the other part. So it's only by doing this that the Discourse would be able to generate better profit and better revenue. So far, 80% is not so bad, but the remaining 20% is also huge. It's money. We are talking about business. And a business can do better when it gets to earn about 90% or 95% or even 100% of what it is putting out.
So we're getting set to round up now. What would be your final message to the citizens of Nigeria, and most importantly to the government and distribution and generation companies, on how to improve the standards for Nigerians, so as we could, if there are models also that Nigerians will need to pick out from or look into, just like you highlighted earlier, that of the United Kingdoms, I beg your pardon. So what other models do you think the government can adopt, and Discourse and GESCOs can adopt to help improve the standard of electricity supply in Nigeria?
So there is a lot to do. Talking specifically to the government must continue to improve the environment. So far, I have seen quite a number of developments, especially when it comes to clearance of legacy debts to the generators, which in turn generators also pay back their legacy loans to their suppliers, to their gas suppliers. So the government have to clear that debt. The commitment has already been made. I am not sure at this stage whether payment have or disbursement have started going out, but it's going to make it easier for this GenCos to attract even better investment and also improve on their infrastructure. That is talking about the government. And talking about other aspects like the Discourse, they must always hold the government accountable, and also the GenCos accountable, because they need enough just so as to satisfy their customer base. When they are not able to provide what they ask for instance, they ask about for huge tariff, and they're not able to provide that, what they will receive in return is an avoidance of proper payments. So consumers as well must rise up to the challenge, because it is a huge challenge. We have more people having no electricity than anywhere in the world. In other words, you can say that we are the darker population in terms of having access to electricity. You're talking about over 80 million or even over 90 million people, according to the World Bank. So this is not a laughable fact. It is a fact that should call us to ponder deeper into the intricacies of power supply and power generation. So consumers must rise to the occasion, demand from the government, and this can also be by choosing the right people to lead them, because politics is undoubtedly a major factor that you cannot take away from any discussion you are having, especially in very necessary conversations around power sector. So consumers must rise to the occasion, and so it is just a multifaceted situation that everybody has to do something. And then you talked about United Kingdom, of course. United Kingdom has one of the best models when it comes to electricity market. Presently, I'm attending an event, it's a conference on investing in renewable energies here in Edinburgh, in Scotland. And you can see how they are talking about improving their infrastructure and even attracting better investment. And mind you, this is a country that has been enjoying 24/7 electricity for many decades. And when Margaret Thatcher came in, she introduced the privatization, and amazingly, it is working and only getting better. So we need to study into this as well and see how we can privatize everything fully and genuinely without putting too much politics into it. Power is a very sensitive commodity. Electricity should not be politicized at all. Until we're able to do this, then we are not going anywhere.
Musa, thank you so very much for taking our time to join us on today's edition of Discourse, and thank you for all of your inputs on the subject matter. These have been very impactful.
Thank you so much, Mr. Samuel. I appreciate it.
Experts have suggested several measures to strengthen the sector. Strengthening transmission infrastructure and national grid requires a significant modernization and also expansion, cost reflectiveness, but fair tariffs. Tariff structure must balance investor stability with consumer affordability. Increased metering, closing the metering gap remains critical to restoring consumer confidence. A stronger regulation and regulatory must enforce performance standards and protect consumers' interest. But this is the size of today's conversation on Discourse. But the message here is both the consumers, both the generating companies, distribution and transmitting, everybody has to work together to be able to make sure Nigeria enjoy constant electricity supply. And that is how much time will permit us to take on today's edition of Discuss. I want to say a very big thank you once again to Musa Asani and Musa, an energy economist, for taking our time to join us on today's edition of Discuss. And I am Samuel Odi. I'll see you again as we discuss further. Bye for now.